On Personally Speaking this week, we address the issue of bullying. If you ever been bullied or you are related to a bully, this is an important show for you to listen to. Our guest is Joe Salamone. Stay with us. Hello, and welcome to Personally Speaking. I'm your host, Monsignor Jim Lisante, and Joe Salamone joins me now. Joe's the founder and executive director of the Long Island Coalition Against Bullying, a position he has held since 2013. The organization is dedicated to combating the harmful impacts of bullying through advocacy, education, and research. Joe Salamone himself was a target of bullying, and it was determined to create an environment that underscores the importance of the issue of bullying while offering support and guidance for victims and their families. The Long Island Coalition Against Bullying works with many Long Island school districts and organizations to maintain and enhance their bullying prevention curriculums. It's Joe's drive and passion for this cause which has enabled the Long Island Coalition Against Bullying to affect change, creating government task forces and leading the charge on advocating for vital anti-bullying legislation. Joe's here with us today to talk about his life, his family, creating a bully-free community on Long Island and around the state, and the Catholic faith and values that have meant the most to him. Joining me now, I'm so pleased to welcome to Personally Speaking, Joe Salamone. Joe is both the founder and executive director of an organization called Long Island Coalition Against Bullying. Joe, first of all, thanks for coming on Personally Speaking, and let's get right into the heart of it. Because it's used so widely now, the whole concept of bullying, what constitutes bullying?
Well, first, thank you for having me. And second, to your question,
Yeah.
it does get thrown around a lot. So we really like to hone in on three specific things, specifically the intention to cause somebody harm. Usually there's some kind of an imbalance of power. It could be age, it could be position. And the last part is the repetitive nature of it. And that really is the key. It's the over and over repetitive nature of the behavior. Now, it doesn't have to be the same behavior over and over, but it does have to be negative and targeted behavior that's repeated.
Okay, now I'm not sure whether it's the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, but just in the past week, I read an article saying we're talking about 1 in 5 young people feel they've been subject to bullying. Does that number sound accurate?
It does, actually, more specifically on Long Island and Nassau and Suffolk County. Our statistics say it's usually a little closer to 1 in 2 or 1 in 3. So I think the Times is being a little more liberal on it. But our numbers internally, when we go in and out of schools, we ask kids the direct question, and it's all anonymous. So we typically trust the answers we get. And our statistics are a little closer to 1 in 2, 1 in 3.
For our listeners and viewers around the world, Joe Salomone's talking about Nassau and Suffolk County. Extending 120 miles from Manhattan is something called Long Island, and that's where Joe has been primarily working. So when he uses information or statistics about Long Island or these two counties, he's talking about a suburban area to the east of New York City. Now let me ask you, because I know it's a big part of how you came to be the founder of the Coalition Against Bullying. So I need to ask you, Joe, what's the history you've had with the experience of bullying?
I was bullied as a kid from sixth grade through pretty much my senior year in high school. Sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, both definitely by far the worst. We had moved from one town to another, born and raised on Long Island, moved from one town to another. And immediately I was the new kid, the weird kid, the quiet kid, the awkward kid. Pretty much any middle school nickname you can give to somebody, they pretty much gave to me. Back then, of course, there was no such thing as cyberbullying. So everything was done, in the kind of good old fashioned way of, repeating something embarrassing to somebody or just spreading a rumor or making fun of them verbally. There was definitely some physical stuff in there as well. They would routinely take my backpack and empty it out throughout the bus so that I would then have to go, clean it all up and get heckled along the way. I'd get followed home off the bus and, kind of ping-ponged around between people. And, so it was definitely rough. By the time I got to the ninth grade, that was when I said, listen, I can't do this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I made myself a promise. And I said, it doesn't really seem to get better. It's not seeming to get better. And that's when I started putting my plan for suicide together. I had written my mother a note. I had made a list of all the things that I wanted her to give away for me after I wasn't here anymore. But it was through the involvement of a teacher, my ninth grade English teacher, who at this point really didn't even remember my name. That she just kept saying, "Why don't you stay with me? Don't go down to the cafeteria. Have lunch with me in my classroom. Stay after school with me. Come join this club." And I said, what do I have to lose at this point?
Yeah.
So, and she inevitably ended up saving my life. Not that, my parents were disconnected or anything, but it was just that extra attention, and really she knew it was not great, but she didn't know how bad it was until about 12 years later, when the organization started and we asked her to be our inaugural honoree at our gala. And that's kind of when I told her just, the impact that she had.
Joe, I wanted to ask you too. I'm always into motive, and so I'm wondering. I obviously I think a kid like you being hurt is a terrible thing, but I want to get into the head a little bit of the person who does the bullying. Um, Not that everybody lives by the golden rule, but the whole concept of doing to others as you would have them do unto you would seem to mitigate against being mean spirited to someone else because no one else wants to be treated that way either. Do you have any idea? And I know it's looking back on your life and looking at what you're doing right now presently, but what motivates the bully?
Typically, it's a cry for help, just in an incredibly inappropriate way. Usually, there's something going on in their life that they're upset about. That could be, even as basic as not getting as much attention from a parent as they may want. But usually, there's something. We try to explain it to parents as kind of an iceberg. For as big as the iceberg is on the surface, when you go underneath the surface, we all know an iceberg is 2 or 3 times bigger than what you see. And that's a really good analogy of explaining the situation with bullying. For as bad as it is on the surface, the real motivation is the bigger issue that we're not paying attention to, which is why we don't completely subscribe to the idea of just keep punishing kids. Because if you're not addressing what could be going wrong, you just kind of perpetuate a cycle where maybe they'll leave this kid alone, but they're not fixing themselves, so they'll move on to somebody else. So the cycle just is never interrupted. Is that to say that every kid that does things to somebody else, has a terrible home life or a situation like that? No. Um, we hear more and more stories as of late that are alarmingly concerning for the complete lack of empathy that is nowhere to be found in these situations. We are finding a lot more now where parents are much more willing to try to find little loopholes, so to speak, where my kid didn't do quite what that kid did. Why is he getting punished? And I feel like we're starting to establish certain thresholds for why kids who are involved in something shouldn't be punished because they didn't do as bad as the person next to them.
Okay. Go back to your story though, Joe. Joe Salamone is our guest. He is the founding person responsible for the Long Island Coalition Against Bullying. But Joe, did you back then, when you'd come home from school after having been bullied and reduced the way you were in a disrespectful way, did you tell your parents?
Not for a while, which is pretty typical. Um, they knew bits and pieces. They knew some of the neighborhood kids that would, and I laugh whenever I say this, but call for, because today's kids don't have to worry about knocking on people's doors or ringing bells to hang out with them. They just text them. But, I did something very strange. Like whenever the neighborhood kids would come knock on the door, I would go out with them, even though I knew what might happen to me when I did. But I was trying to show my parents that I was making an attempt to try to fit in and make friends. Some stuff I would tell them about, some stuff I wouldn't, but there was a kind of a pinnacle moment where one of the times where they emptied my backpack on the bus, they stole my eyeglasses. And at that point, I only needed glasses to see distance. So if I wasn't looking at a screen or a chalkboard, I wasn't wearing them. So they took them out of my bag. They put the case back in the bag, but took the glasses. And it was after several days of pretty much going home, going right to bed because I couldn't sit in front of the TV and enjoy it. So I just would try to opt out of that. And my mother really started asking, like, what's the problem? Where are your glasses? And that's when I finally came clean with just how rough it has been and like to the degrees that they're going to now.
Joe Salamone's our guest. Joe, if maybe this is a stereotypical movie response, but if mom and dad find out that their beloved son is being treated badly, uh, is the proper response for that parent to get in their car and go over to the house and say to another parent, "Your kid is being abusive of my son, and I'm not going to tolerate it anymore." Is that a proper response?
We typically, in today's day and age, advise against that just because of how quick everybody is to get very defensive. I mean, everybody loves their children. So, nobody wants to admit that their kid might be a problem. So,
Yeah.
even when you're dealing with two parties that maybe the parents get along really well,
Mm,
that dynamic shifts the second you make an accusation about another one's kid.
right.
So, we advise against it. We say, of course, use your own judgment, but just remember that even a good relationship can become sour in an instant when you level an accusation like that.
Mm,
We usually advise to work through the school, kind of use them as an intermediary. But is it impossible to accomplish a good resolution? No, I actually just dealt with. We were dealing with a situation a couple of weeks ago where the families worked it out amongst themselves, and it went successful. But we've had plenty of other examples where mom shows up on somebody else's porch at 7:30 at night while the other mother's doing the dishes, rings the bell and says, this has got to end. And it doesn't end the way she thought it would.
right, right, right. Joe Salamone's our guest. As I said, he's the executive director of the Long Island Coalition Against Bullying. And now I got to ask you this because I'm kind of intrigued by it myself. Is that when you were bullied, of course, as you mentioned earlier in the interview, it was a pardon the expression, but a slightly more innocent world, and that we weren't constantly surrounded by social media. You go to school, you get bullied, but you go home and there's a little safety zone. Now, when you go home, the bullying doesn't stop because it will continue on social media and maybe even spread. So, the long term impact of social media and access to our phones and computers is, in your estimation, what impact does it have on bullying?
It's a complete game changer
Mm,
because when we ask kids, which of the four forms of bullying, social, mental, physical, or cyber, do you tend to see the most or have you ever dealt with? Cyber is actually going down as a specific category. And it's not, in our estimation, it's not because it's actually getting better. It's just because it's an automatic. The generation in school today is the first generation that was born into a world where social media was waiting for them.
mm,
My generation was on the cusp. I graduated high school when Facebook was first becoming popular.
mm,
So we still remember a world where, we can remember what it was like without it. These kids don't understand the concept of a world pre-Snapchat, pre-TikTok, all those things.
mhm,
So it's kind of automatic and assumed that even in a physical altercation that happens, unfortunately it happens in schools depending on where you are fairly frequently. They are very quick to pull out their phones and record what is happening so that they can go post it. They're not thinking of, the level of embarrassment that might be caused. They're not thinking of who else are they capturing in this video potentially doing wrongdoing, that this existence now is going to get them in trouble. So it's a complete game changer because it's not the direct messaging people, I hate you, you're terrible. It's the embarrassing things. I was in a school 3 weeks ago where a kid was coming down the hallway and another kid passed him and he tripped. I went over to help him pick up his books and stuff. The other kid, audibly, for me to hear, said, "Damn, I wish I had my phone." And that's the default action because what were you going to do? Seeing somebody trip was going to be something you needed to put out there. But that's kind of like the automatic now. Not to every kid, of course. We're painting very broad brushes right now, but not every kid does that. But they are in a world where the expectation is that it's going to show up on social media somewhere. A very short example that just to the lengths that it goes. Last year, there was a horrific incident with a stabbing at a school district in a middle school. And the video of the poor young man laying in the hallway, bleeding out, he had to be airlifted to the hospital, all that. I asked that in other schools. What do you think the kids that were in the hallway when this was happening, what did you think they did? It is usually the first or second answer. They recorded it. Like it's that much of a programmed answer. So cyber and social media has been a complete game changer. And to your point, it doesn't just stop when you get off the bus and you close your bedroom door and you're there. It's going on around you. That video is circulating. That rumor is circulating. So it really, there's no other way to put it other than it changed the game entirely.
For our listeners and watchers, Joe Salamone is, in fact, a practicing Catholic. So I want to go back to the God piece in this. Back when you said, Joe, that in the midst of despair, when you were being overwhelmed by bullying, you took some time to think about the possibility of ending your life. Where at that point would God fit into all this? Like, you'd know that God didn't want Joe to end his life. So was that even a consideration, the whole faith question?
No, I mean, thinking back, I don't really think it was part of the equation. If anything, I think I was kind of looking at it where I was pointing the finger at him, kind of saying, like, why isn't my life happier? Like, what did I do wrong? Things like that. And, why me? Why me?
Mhm.
But that's to even the extent that it did. I had a very cyclical journey back to God and back to the faith. I think it was my mother tried her hardest to bring us to church when we were younger, and we did. But then, she started working two jobs. My dad, sets foot in church twice for a wedding and a funeral. That's basically his going into church. Um, so when I was younger, at this point, we had stopped pretty much going to church.
Okay.
So I don't really know how much if it entered into the equation at all. It was more of a criticism of how could you be doing this to me? Why am I deserving of this? More of a of a help. It was more of a criticism.
Joe, in most movies that are popular out there, that the kid takes bullying for a long time, and then the moment comes when our intrepid hero isn't going to take it anymore, and he just socks the heck out of the guy who's been abusing him. Is that all Hollywood stuff, or did you ever have a moment where you said, "I may be small in these guys, but I'm not taking it anymore," and using physical violence as a protection?
Twice I did actually, but I was that kid that just let it build and build and build, and my mother would repeatedly tell the principal, like, I know his personality. He's just going to let it gather and build, and then one day he's going to explode.
Hmm.
And I did, and I it was once in middle school, and then again once in my junior year of high school. And the we get that question all the time from parents, like, what? At this point, I don't care what the school says. I'm just gonna tell them. They lay another hand on you, they do something, walk up, lay them out, and that's it. And I
Right.
think there's two different worlds at war with each other in that. We don't ever want kids to resort to physical violence, but
Yeah.
at the same time, you can understand how they get there. And I can't do the job I do without acknowledging that sometimes it does bring an end to the situation.
Hmm.
Because a bully wants power. If they are not getting the power, and you have done the ultimate thing by reacting in such a overly demonstrable way, that's seizing the power that clearly they're not getting it anymore. And usually they will walk away. But
Yeah.
what I think we need to spend a better time doing, and we are putting a lot more attention now, clearly, is getting that cycle to stop before it gets to that point. And that's where I think the focus really needs to be. We acknowledge, and I think society acknowledges how that could be an unfortunate tool and sometimes resolves the issue, but we want to disengage that bomb before it goes off.
Right. Joe Salamone's our guest. As I mentioned, he founded an organization called Long Island Coalition Against Bullying. Um, I don't know if this is your experience, but I'm wondering institutionally what really can be done. Like, you're talking about personal responses, whether it's guiding a student who feels he's being bullied, or trying to get into the head of the person who does the bullying, or getting parents involved. But I know, Joe, that your organization reaches out to schools and school districts, but institutionally, whether it's school districts or even groups of students, what can you really do practically to change the model of bullying versus the victim?
Well, I think it's all in the way you phrase it, first of all. We are not typically fans of using the word victim. We like to use the word target.
Ah,
And I think
tell us,
societally,
what's the difference there, Joe?
so victim is when you kind of feel like, you are not really in control of what's happening to you. It's just being done to you. When
Okay.
you're targeted, it's all in the psychology of the language. When if everybody looks at themselves as the victim, everything that ever happens to them is going to be viewed in the lens of, well, of course, this has just been everything that's always happened to me.
Mhm.
When you change the language a little bit, especially for kids, it is freeing, because then you can go back and demonstrate to the idea of, like, listen, this is not happening to you because of something you're doing. It
Right.
can be changed. um, and I think we can use the same kind of methodology with a lot of the way we frame conversations in society, not just this one. When it comes to the concept of actually who's engaging in the bullying, we like to talk about it as a behavior, not as a label, because it's very easy to make kids feel like, well, if I'm already doing this, this is what everybody thinks about me, and well, this is what I am, rather than saying you're engaging in bullying behavior, but you could choose to do it differently.
Okay.
When we go into, speaking to your point about institutionally, when we go in to talk to kids in schools, we never frame the conversation asking them to feel badly about prior mistakes. Because I say, listen, we're going to draw the line today. Whatever you've done before I walked in the door, wipe it clean. It probably, you have everybody in this room, no one is an angel, but no one is a demon either.
Right.
So let's all get on the same page. We've all made mistakes. Have I ever repeated something about somebody else with asking myself whether it was true? Of course I have. We all have done it. But it's, do you get into a pattern where that's all you do, or do you make mistakes and then say, I could do better next time? And that, I think, when you give kids the opportunity to say, I've made mistakes, but set the bar where they can actually reach it. Don't set it so high that they always feel like no matter how hard they try, they're never getting to it. Because the more attainable the goal is for them, the more when they reach it, they'll be willing to go higher and further. So I think institutionally, it's important that, school districts in particular bring home the idea of social emotional learning is just as important as ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. And I believe that needs to be reinforced at home as well. I hear plenty of schools constantly tell us, we feel like we made a connection with this kid today. Finally, we broke through. But we know he's coming back tomorrow after spending, all night at the dinner table with his family. And, we're going to re-inherit it tomorrow morning and have to start from square one. I think there needs to be a good symbiotic relationship there where each party is balancing each other with the core principles of right and wrong and how to treat people.
Joe, and I know that there's lots of information out there about body shaming that goes on. And I'm thinking to myself, so if a person doesn't look so wonderful, doesn't like the way they look, or they're heavy, or they may be battling acne, or whatever the particular problem is for the young person, that they're more susceptible to being bullied, and that the person who is physically active, an athlete, looking good, handsome, beautiful, doesn't have to worry about that. I think that's probably a simplification, isn't it? That doesn't really matter what you look like, that everyone has got the possibility of ending up being bullied.
Absolutely, because we are the person who's on the receiving end of the targeted behavior is never the one who's saying, okay, this is what I think you should go after me about. We're not in the driver's seat on that decision.
Yeah.
One of the things when we talk to parents specifically is we'll put up a long list of all of the stereotypical reasons kids get targeted. And is usually a fairly stereotypical list, but then we white it out and we just put anyone, because really that's the answer. A person who is able to identify about someone else whatever their insecurities are. So for me, for a long time, even as I was coming into young adulthood, I started visibly losing my hair at 21. As I was, going through life, that was a major insecurity of me. I was the only kid my age that I was hanging out with that was visibly, follically challenged.
Yeah.
And it definitely was something that I, held on to.
This is off the topic, but on. Joe Salamone is our guest, founder of Long Island Coalition Against Bullying. Joe, as a young man, you are out of the mainstream in that our parents and grandparents are churchgoers, but you as a young man still pretty much go. How come?
Uh, well, to give a shameless plug to the man of the hour, I would probably put a lot of that on you. Um, I alluded earlier to, we're not always, very faithful churchgoers. When I was given the opportunity, to kind of go on my own, I remember when the movie The Passion came out, it was like a resurgence of like religious connection, and I felt something. And for a while, I started riding my bike back to Our Lady of Lourdes in West Islip,
Ah,
and would try to go on my own. And then, like all things, they kind of fizzled. But years ago, when I was at a point in my life where things weren't going oh so great, it was right at the point where you had come to the parish, and it was by chance I went with my grandparents, and it was your mass. And I remember writing you the letter that I did, and kind of opening up about the fact that I was a little lost when it came to that. And I think so. A lot of it is, you personally, but I also have come to really appreciate and see God in ways that I didn't see it before and see him before. And I acknowledge that, you know, as much as I might want to run the charts on the way I want my life to look, I really do have to fall back and say, you know, it's really not up to me. And I got into a debate the other day with somebody where they said, well, for you to say that it's not up to you, that means that God is some kind of puppet master. I said, I don't think so. I said, I think he gives us all opportunity and sight and hopes that after he's given you the opportunity and the sight to see those opportunities, that you take advantage of it. Not everybody does, and some people it takes a little while to do it, but I think I have. I certainly never saw myself in the role I am and doing what I'm doing, but you know, try as hard as you did to get me to wear the collar. I opted for a different kind of vocation to humanity, but
I want to thank Joe Salamone. And Joe is everything he's presenting to us today really comes down to a story of conversion of hearts and minds. I often think that bullying is not unlike the issue of the right to life, that legally things will always be up in the air, but that if we can change hearts and minds into convincing people that life is sacred, we may actually save some lives. And you're doing the same thing in so many ways. Joe also told another time, we'll have him on another time to tell the story of someone who had been one of his bullies who actually sought him out to apologize and make peace. And that's the kind of reconciliation we're hoping for. Joe, in the literally 30 seconds we have left, folks around the country, around the world who want to know more about what they might do, how kind of coalition they might put together to stop bullying, what's the best way to reach you and your organization?
Our website at licab.org, or they could give us a call at 516-777-7709.
Okay, do that again slowly and tell them what those letters stand for.
So licab.org, Long Island Coalition Against Bullying. And our phone number is 516-777, breath, 7709. A lot of sevens in there.
That's wonderful. I thank Joe for being with us again. And so many people say as they go, tisk, 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 the world's in sorry shape. And then there are others who say, well, it is, but I'm going to do something to make it better. And that's Joe Salamone. I'm so grateful for what you're doing and who you are. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
As we end today's program, I want to thank you all for being with us. If you need to reach me, you can do that at personallyspeakingpodcast@gmail.com. We're also, you're probably listening to this on Sirius XM, the Catholic channel, but if you want to watch the program, we're on YouTube. You can search under Personally Speaking with Monsignor Jim Lisante. We're also on Facebook at Personally Speaking with Monsignor Jim Lisante and on Instagram at Personally Speaking Podcast. Please share and tell your friends and family about our program. I've been privileged to serve as host and executive producer of Personally Speaking. Our producer is Lisa Jandovitz. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be with you again next time on Personally Speaking.